Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Hope you guys are doing well. February is almost over. Spring is coming up very soon. But before we look that far ahead, we should talk about January.
Oh, that's
forever
right.
ago.
It seems like things may have happened in January. And it seems like Blizzard may have finally gotten around to acknowledging all the things that have happened in January.
Yeah, so look, it has been a very tumultuous month over at Blizzard, Activision Blizzard, with the 800 people being laid off. Within the Arena HS community, though, a lot of people have been very worried that the leaderboards, they had not come out when they were supposed to come out, and people were worried that they might never come out again. And word of this reached Ixar, and within a couple of days, they released the leaderboard. So we do have them for January, although they came out extremely late. They came out, I think, on the 22nd, when typically the leaderboards come out around like the 10th-ish of each month. So we have them. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of the format they're going to use or how they want to do it in the future, because Blizzard did state that it's a little bit awkward now, because what they used to do was every single month, they used to come out and be like, hey, here are the leaderboards for Standard, Wild, and Arena, and it was all in one blog post, and you could see why that was necessary. But recently, they just made a real-time leaderboard for Constructed, which means now every single month, if they keep doing this thing, it's only for Arena. So Blizzard came out and said, we're still trying to figure out if this is the best format to do it in. But we have the rankings for January, and it seems as though they are going to keep doing it for February, so no need to fear, guys. All right, let's go on to who placed in January, because January was a extremely interesting month. That was when everyone was preparing for the Twitch Rivals event as well. So if we check this out, congratulations to Alpha Ferret with an average win of 9.03.
Nice.
That's insane.
Yeah. And I've heard of that name before. I think this person's been on the leaderboard before, definitely.
Yeah. So congrats to Alpha Ferret. Let's just go down the top 10. Like number 2 is Dijskrat. I'm going to butcher some of these names. I apologize, with 8.43. And then it's a pretty, close kind of cascade downwards. But the difference between number 1 and number 2 is insane. It's 0.6, which is actually ridiculous. So number 3 is Shaco, followed by Dreads, as you guys know.
Hey.
A-Dubs at number 5, another familiar face. Number 6 is Darling. Number 7 is Savior. Number 8 is Fairway. Number 9 is Tachi. Number 10 is Redbeard. So congratulations to all those in the top 10.
That's actually like a lot of like known names in the top 10.
A lot of known names, yeah. And we actually have a lot of known names in the leaderboards in general. So if you look down the top 150, you will also see Talreal, you'll see Boozer, you'll see Tex, Kaboomba, tons and tons of people. I think Cece also made her very first leaderboard as well at number 33. So congrats to Cece. Yeah. And I made it too. It was
Merps
kind of
on
like
the leaderboard, having completed 30 games in 30 runs in 1 month for the first time since you were last number 1, if I'm remembering this correctly.
It was very incidental. It was purely in preparation for the Twitch Rivals event. So you'll find me at number 41 with 7.33. It was, I'm glad I made it, but it was one of those things where I remember at the beginning of the month, I'm like, well, since I'm furloughed, I can either make a legitimate run for this, or I can just prep for the Twitch Rivals event, because I found out that I was participating in Twitch Rivals about like a week earlier than you did, right? Yeah. Because of the timing. So I was just prepping for that, and I didn't even really track. I remember though, I think within those 30 runs, I had at least 203s, which is not great. One was actually just like me tryharding and I didn't get it. And one was me testing out Priest. A week before Twitch Rivals, I was just like, I need to figure out Priest. Or I need to figure out whether or not I can play Priest for the tournament.
And the answer was no. A very emphatic no.
It was an emphatic no. And it came from the results. So those were not really great for my average. Yeah. But it was fun. No. And it's always nice getting back to the leaderboard and seeing tons and tons of names on the leaderboard as well. Also, because I'm looking at it right now, Hafu also made the leaderboard. I won't out her name, but I do recognize her tag. And I think it just goes to show that, you know, for once again, I say this every time the leaderboards come out, but once again, if you believe that the arena game is more random, you know, than you would like, then I would just point you to all of these people, right? Especially people like Dreads, who month in, month out, it's like sun comes up, sun goes down, Dreads makes the leaderboard, right? Stuff like that. So keep going at it, guys. And if you want to hear what a really truly inspirational story, go back to the Lightforge where we had Boozer on.
Oh yeah.
And he will go through with you the story of how he was kind of just an average player to only, quote unquote, like a 6-win player, right? Just kind of struggling to be even fake infinite, and then his rise to the top of the arena game. So yeah, that's kind of it. Congrats to everyone. It was a very fun January, punctuated by the Twitch Rivals event, and hopefully we'll have another one in maybe April, May. Keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you brought up, like, going back a bit of the conversation. You had 203 runs in your like 30-run group, right? So
I know I had another one in the month. I don't know if it was in my 30.
Oh, if it was in your 30 run, right?
Yeah.
But still, like, we play, like, I mean, I'm sure you did not play more than like 40, 50 runs at most over the course of January.
I think it was like 45.
Yeah, like 45.
I think it was like 45.
Okay,
right.
But yeah, like, so you at least have 103 run in your record, right?
No, it was definitely 2. It was definitely 2.
Oh, you definitely had 2.
I definitely had 2
runs in your record.
Yeah.
And you were still 41, and you know, you were like sort of trying, but not really trying for the leaderboard, right? Just like taking the game seriously, but also doing a little experimentation.
I played way too much Priest.
Yeah, in December, when I was actually trying to make the leaderboard, and I ended up with 13, with number 13, I had an 03 run in my 30 runs as well.
Yeah, we co-opted that one.
Yeah, it was. And
by co-opt, I was just like,
you existed there and observed in real time how screwed
I laughed at your hand. I laughed at your hands. Yeah, that was
terrible. But yeah, so like when you talk about like consistency, right? There is consistency, but you can have consistency within 30 runs and like still do really well and have an 03. Like the 03s are going to happen. If it's not an 03, it's a 1-3 or a 2-3, and it's not like that different, right? It's like a run that totally sinks you. Yeah, 03 is way more demoralizing than a 1-3 or a 2-3, but really that's just 1 or 2 more wins. That's the difference between like a 9-win run and an 11-win run, right? Like when you average it all out. So it's, when we're talking about consistency in the arena, skill in the arena, it's never about a particular run. It's not even about a particular run with a particular like level of deck, right? Were your 03 runs like terrible decks?
One of the Priest ones I drafted, quote, terrible. Well, that was me trying to stretch it, right? I was like trying with different things. I also got a 03 with a Hunter, and that was like the flukiest 03 run I've ever seen. And so that one was off stream, and I was just like, I don't understand this. Right. None of it made sense, but it happens. Yeah, right.
That's what happens. Yeah. So it's not like good players will take like okay-ish decks and then make sure they never get 03s with it. No, it happens. It happens even when you're trying hard. It happens, you know, anywhere. But ultimately, over the course of even a sample of 30 runs, which is not like that large of a sample size, it'll still even out. And if you can get that consistency through that, and then you have players, you know, who play way more, right? Like streamers who stream like 6 nights a week, like we were talking about Dreads. So when you have the luxury of getting like more than 100 runs, right? Collins does the same thing. In a month, you can get those out, but they'll still sneak in to your overall like performance somewhere. It's not the top 30 runs.
Right.
But that's what we mean by consistency. Just so, like, if people are out there and it's like, oh, but sometimes I just can't do anything. It's like, yeah, like we're living proof. Sometimes you can't do anything, right? We both have 0-3s in our like leaderboard run records, but it doesn't sink you overall.
It definitely doesn't sink you. And month in and month out, there will be wild swings on what you need to do to get into the top 5 or just be number 1, right? Number 1, like the swings are so huge, what you need to get number 1. But consistently, if you're in North America and you get like 6.9, you're like really safe. And if you just want to get on the leaderboard, right? Like 6.9, you're like really, really safe. That's like approximately top 100. So you don't even need to be a pure 7. Which I want to emphasize because, we talk about this a lot. I always talk about the top 10 as well. And we're always just like, yeah, like this person got 8, this person got 8.2, number 1 was like 8.8 or something. I think a lot of people out there is like, geez, I can't do that. Well, you don't have to do that. all you have to do, and once again, this is still a huge accomplishment, but you don't have to get those crazy scores.
Yeah. If
you get a flat 7, 100% you are on the leaderboard. If you get like a 6.8, you're probably getting on the leaderboard as well.
And keep in mind that people who get like 8 wins or more per run, like, or 8 wins, I think is about the tip. Anything above 8 wins, no one's getting that consistently month in, month out. You can track anybody. I remember back when we first started with the Arena Coupe, and we're like, oh, we're going to get like a 7.3 because we're going to play all classes like, evenly, and that's what we do. What would really happen if we got to pick our class? And I think we estimated like maybe 8, right? Like, I think our estimate was, because we, like, all classes evenly around, like, low 7 point whatevers. You focus in on only the top classes, it'll bring it up to, like, maybe 8, but definitely not much more than that. And over the years, they've changed the arena format so many times. They've added so many new cards, they've taken away cards, they've Hall of Fame cards, and we're still in that general zone, where if you want to talk about actual consistency, like month in, month out, 8 wins is about the consistency that you can achieve. And things that are higher than that are like, not like flukes, but they're like, it's variance, right? No one will get like 8 wins every single run. So on some 30 win run sets, it'll go higher. But if you want to track like a 300 game average for like a player, it's going to end up being like 8 for the top. Okay, so that's the arena leaderboards, and I want to set out here now. This is kind of a weird podcast episode, I think, because like I was dying last week. I'm still kind of dying now, but like more from tiredness than from actually being destroyed. And nothing's happened. Like for the entire month of February, pretty much nothing has happened in the arena. We had the Twitch Rivals event, and there was a like I think the week before that, there was a rebucketing, or maybe like a week and a half before that, there was a rebucketing. And then Blizzard's just been dealing with their own stuff since then. So we haven't even had like a rebucketing or like a micro adjust, like nothing. And I'm not sure that we will have one, because it is a little polarized if you look at win rates on HS Replay, especially on the bottom of Hunter. But like Warlock at like 52%, maybe 53% is not too terrible. And Warlock's one of those classes where if you look at average players instead of HS Replay players, by the way, are above average players. I know we make fun of them in the aggregate as being like, oh, there's just HS Replay. They're not like good players, but they're like 4.5 win players on average, I think, which is 50% higher than your 3-win average players that Blizzard's going to be looking at stats for. So I think it's entirely possible we don't really get much more of this until the next expansion is about to launch. Also, around this time, we usually get an event. I think that's been true for like the last like 4 expansions. There's no event.
People thought we were going to get a wild event.
Yeah, and we still might.
It didn't happen.
We still might. There's still 6 more weeks until the next expansion launches.
Right.
And the last 2 weeks, they never have an event. But that still leaves 4 more weeks, right? And we saw what they did with, what was that? that in June, when they like announced the like 30 extra cards they were going to put into the arena, and it was in the arena in 2 days. You remember when that happened?
Yeah,
that was fun to do the algorithm. So, you know, anything can happen. I'm not going to say that we're just looking at a very kind of like dull, consistent meta for Rastakhan throughout, but we are in that zone where it's pretty clear that Blizzard has taken their foot off the pedal. They're gearing up for the next expansion, and the next expansion being a huge one with a rotation attached to it, right? And we'll be doing the same. So after this Lightforge, we're gonna enter into a series, even like through the next expansion announcement and whatever. As long as there's no event. If there's an event, we'll cover that obviously. But if there's no event, we're going to go do a pretty deep dive, I think, into how we think the rotation is going to impact the meta, because a lot of cards are rotating out. And more importantly, a lot of the really good cards, the really meta-defining cards, are rotating out. And it's true in Standard, and it's true in Arena. And we're just... I think the last year, if you look around this time when we did it, we spent like one Lightforge episode covering it, and it just wasn't enough. Like, the amount of changes that sprung from that, we felt like we were backpedaling the entire way. And like, thank God they super over-bucketed all the Witchwood cards. So that the idea is Witchwood did not affect the Arena meta. Why? Because all the cards are over bucketed and you should never take them. So we had a little bit of a breathing room to like kind of like catch up, and it was when bucketing was introduced, and so like we had to like deal with that as well. But we're gonna be on top of the ball this year, and it's not gonna be as crazy, and we're gonna spend at least 3 Lightforges talking mostly about how the rotation is going to affect the Arena meta. So you guys are like very prepared. So when the new set launches, when the new set starts getting revealed, if Blizzard makes any new crazy Arena rules in the meantime, we can be all focused on that instead of still trying to figure out how the rotation affects the game. And that's going to start next week. For today, we're just going to take it easy. We have I kind of wanted to bring this back a little to control, because control is still pretty powerful in this meta, and I know that if I leave Merps to his devices, he would just talk about Hunter every single Lightforge episode.
There's so much to talk about.
I don't disagree. I do not disagree. And before that, before all the Hunter talk, we talked a lot about mid-range, because that's how I was doing my leaderboard run, and Twitch Rivals we talked about as well a lot, and Twitch Rivals was a lot of mid-range with a little bit of aggro. It's actually very hard to play control in Twitch Rivals, even though I did play a control deck to start with Warrior. But in your regular arenas, control still works very, very, very well. And you can do traditional kind of control-y decks that you think of as control, which is Mage and Priest and Warrior nowadays. Or you can do the more... They're still pretty control-y in that they're like very thick kind of like decks that go really deep into the late game. But I'm thinking like Rogue, for example, which is hero power based, in that if you hero power on 2, you don't need 2 drops. That means you have like 6 extra large cards instead of small cards. Rogue also has good card draw, so rogues can go really deep. And you also have Warlocks, which can use the hero power to draw their entire deck, right? So especially now with so much healing in the game. That's and lifesteal, right? Consistent life leech creatures. It's definitely a possibility. So there's a lot of ways to do these like attrition-y kind of control games. But one of the common threads with them, well, maybe not Warlock. Warlock is kind of weird, but also Warlock. One of the common threads to these control kind of decks is you want to get maximum value out of your board clears. This has always been true. This is not like a new concept that we're springing out of nowhere, but board clears are very important to control decks. What do you know? And we will launch into a official deep fried meta, the first one in a while, and we're going to talk about today how to set up your board clears. And I'm going to try to break this down. Like, we go very analytical when we talk about aggro and mid-range, because, like, honestly, it's easier to go analytical. Like if you're talking about mulligans, you can say what you mulligan away and what you keep. If you're talking about curve, you can say what 3/2s trade with 4/2s, which trade with like 3/4s on 3 and what they do. If you talk about aggro, you can talk about how much damage you have to push to their face on what turn the game needs to like end, right? Like you can't go specific into every variant of a situation, but because your game is limited to a number of very, very important turns and a number of very, very, very important decisions, you can talk more about it. For control, it's kind of like, I feel like we fall back a lot into these general, when it comes to gameplay. Drafting is a different matter, but when it comes to gameplay, we fall back into these general platitudes almost, like, yeah, taunt up, make sure you heal, don't fall behind on curve, you know, don't be too greedy, and like, you'll just eventually have more cards than your opponent and you'll eventually win, right? But there is skill involved in control, and although I think we normally take the position, and we still take the position, that on a per decision basis, there's less skill in control, but you are going to be forced into like a lot of these decisions because you're purposely dragging the game out. So they kind of add up. And one of the most important decisions you make as a control player is how to set up your board clears, right? You're always wondering about one of two things. One is like how to set up a board clear, and two, somewhat related, is when can I anti-tempo without dying to like draw cards or heal or do whatever. So let's talk about the board clear setup here. Merps, what do you like think about? You talked about experimenting with priests. Let's say you're gonna play like some kind of control priest or control mage, and you have no 2-drops, you have a whole bunch of 3-drops, you're like stabilizing on the board, you have a board clear in your hand. Let's say it's a blast wave or a mass hysteria. Like, what are some thoughts going through your head on when I'm going to play this card, or what I'm looking for before I play this card, or how do I play maybe differently if I have the card already in my hand?
Ooh, so
just very generally.
Everything that I'm thinking of. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. Okay, let's name a few things, right? Number one, kind of just how good is the board clear on the board itself, right? So the first level is just like, if I'm thinking board clear at all, I'm like, how good is it? Like if I'm wiping off, you know, a 5-drop and a 4-drop and a 3-drop with just one AoE, I'm like, hey, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I'm looking at, just the value on the board. And then number two, I'm also just looking at, well, do I have other board clears, right? Is this the only one that I have? In which case, maybe I save it. Number three is like, what do I have on the board? If I can just trade on the board, maybe I can save it for a better time. So I'll leave it to those three for now, but there are like a million things that we can possibly think of, which is also why we're talking about it today.
Yeah. And that's all right. You're supposed to think about all of these things. And if you listen to Merps' like description of what's a pretty general and correct way to think about all the factors, there's a crap ton of factors, right? Like, how do you take that and actually apply it in a real game situation outside of the very obvious cases? Like, he has a bunch of stuff that I can Flamestrike. I have a Flamestrike. I use the Flamestrike. I win the game. Okay, so I'm going to break it down into two things. I'm going to approach this from a very macro kind of oriented fashion rather than micro, just because I tend to think about the game in terms of macro. Micro is what you think of, like, you know, I trade a 3-attack minion into this thing that has 5 health, now it has 2 health, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's micro, right? Macro is like, I get the most efficient use out of all my resources, which means eventually I will just have more resources than my opponent, and then I figure out which is the correct type of resources I want, like face damage or board or health or cards or whatever. And if I can make those two things work out, then I'm just going to have more of the thing that matters than my opponent, and then I will win. That's a lot of times that works better for mid-range, but I'm going to approach the board clear setup in the same manner, because I think you could think about it in the same way, at least if you're trying to be consistent with it. There is another element to it that I'm going to actually almost completely set aside, which is mind games. Because that involves like reading an opponent and things like that, and you really don't get enough time in the arena with the same opponent to get like the best like hard reads on their play style and what they're willing to commit. You can get reads on what cards they have because they don't use it. Like, if they could have hard removed the thing and they would have and they didn't, then they don't have a hard removal. Like, that's a read. Like, my opponent is going to play 3 more minions into my Flamestrike if I give him an extra turn. That's not a read. You can't get that read in the arena. You may be able to get that read if you were facing the same player over and over again, but you're not going to get that read in the arena. Okay, so we're going to keep things very simple. There's 2 axes I'm going to worry about. One, as Merps was talking about, he said value, right? It's like, how much value am I getting out of using this board clear? And I'm going to use a very, very basic board clear. This may sound like not a basic board clear, but actually is a very basic board clear. Mass Hysteria. And Mass Hysteria, I'm going to say, is basic because it clears the whole board, more or less. Weird things can happen. You don't want it to... I don't want to use an example of, like, Twisting Nether or, like, Psychic Scream or something, because that actually clears everything. I want to introduce an element of, like, yeah, my opponent could potentially screw with me, but there's no way he would intentionally screw with me or is capable of picking it off, right? And also, Mass Hysteria being available on turn 5 means you have a lot of turns that you will have to keep thinking about this card, right? Do I play it now? Do I play it now? Do I wait? Do I play it now? So I think these kinds of thought processes get used more from things like Mass Hysteria than things like Psychic Scream or Twisting Nether. So value is just how much do I get out of it. Let's say I have a card. It is called Mass Hysteria. It is 5 mana. How much damage am I normally dealing with 5 mana? Fireball's 6, right? So like maybe like 7, maybe like 8 Flamelands? Was 8?
7, 7 to 8. I think that's how much a class card typically deals. Sometimes it's split, right? So I'm also you're looking at Fireball, you're looking at multi-shot, you're looking at...
Yeah, this is like 1 mana more. Like, Assassinate's a hard removal, right? 8/8's a pretty standard, like, very good target for hard removal that's not, like, game-breakingly hard removed. So 8 damage, right? You get 8 damage where you want it. Okay. So we're going to call that good value. And I'm going to... I have it ranked here as 6 types of values that you can get out of the card. And they go from dead, meaning you can't even get any value out of this card. That means it's a double-sided board clear and you're on the board. It means the card is a negative if you try to play it. It's a dead card. Bad value, where you can get some kind of value out of it, but it's like very anti-tempo and anti-card advantage. Like, let's say you need to Hellfire to kill a 3/2. Because you have a board, your opponent has a board, and you can make the trades in such a way that your Hellfire will kill a 3/2. You get bad value out of it if you use it at that point. You still get some value out of it. It's not a dead card. It's an option, but you're trying not to use that option. Normal value, meaning you're getting normal value out of the expenditure. So in the 5 mana case, normal value is it's tempo neutral value. 5 mana, 5 tempo, 5 damage. Good value is where we're at right now, which is what your normal removals card value is. Because you have to hit the conditional, right? Like, why is Fireball dealing 6 damage instead of 4? Well, because it's conditional. Your opponent needs to play something that has 6 health at least for you to be able to deal this damage. That's why, like, you have to get a little more from your removals than to actually just deal the amount of damage of the mana. That's why you spend 4 mana, you get like a Yeti. But if it's a removal, your 4 mana dealing 4.5 damage would be crap. Like, you wanted to deal more. So, the actual good value, the value you're expecting to get from these removals, is always higher than normal value. So in this case, we said 8. Then, you have extra value. Board clears can get extra value. They can usually get nearly like uncapped value, right? You can clear their entire board with a Mass Hysteria. You can deal like 30 damage with a Mass Hysteria potentially. So extra value is any significant value you get out of the good value or the card value, which is the 8 damage value. And finally, game-winning value is like the 30 damage one, where it's like, you played really, really into it. Maybe that was your only out. Maybe you knew that if I had this card, you lose. But I do have this card, so you lose. Okay. So, that's the value axis. The other axis, just so you can keep it in the back of your mind, is the cost level. And that is how much it costs. And I don't mean in mana cost. I mean how much it costs you to set up this board clear. When Merps is talking about, like, first I look at the board and I see what's on the board, that's cost less. It costs you nothing to look at the board every single turn. Sometimes they just happen to set up your board clear for you, especially when it's a single-sided board clear, right? Like, sometimes they play into a Consecration, sometimes they play into a Flamestrike. You use it, you win, easy. It's costless. Other times, the cost rises, right? So we'll talk about that afterwards. But there's two axes that I'm thinking about. One is the cost, and one is the value. In terms of the cost and value, you can think of it in terms of like almost like a graph. Like a chart and a line where the more you delay, the more value you have to get out of the card for your delaying to have been a good decision to begin with. Because if you could play Mass Hysteria on turn 5 and get like 6 damage, and you're like, I don't like that, I'm gonna wait, and I'm gonna do something later on for it to get more value. Well, if you can get 6 damage again the next turn, you haven't broken even. Like, yeah, you spent 5 mana, get 6 damage in both cases, but you've just lost the ability to use it on a more impactful turn, and your opponent got to do more stuff for one turn, whether it's deal a little face damage, control the board a little more.
Right. I want to also say, this is conditional on the fact, like, so your Mass Hysteria has been lowered in value. If you had a really amazing turn 5 play that would have been better, then net, perhaps, right. Like, yeah. So, like, if you had an amazing Fungalmancer play, right, perhaps that would have been better. But your Mass Hysteria goes down. Net, you can still benefit if you had a better play. But yeah. I just want to add that in.
Yeah, so your actual decision-making process evaluates all of your options, right, to figure out what the best play is. But in terms of the value of the card that you have, it's going down when you delay it. Okay, so with that in mind, you are drafting a card. And when you draft a card, you draft it based on some tier list value adjusted by whatever you have in your head. So normally, you're drafting a card for it to be the good value or the card value, right? You want your Mass Hysteria to deal 8 damage. Which means anything that makes it deal more than 8 damage is greedy. It may be correct to be greedy in certain situations, but I see a lot of player just as the default, as an absolute default for when they will play Mass Hysteria, to be like, I need to deal 12 damage with this card. Or I'm not going to play it because it's not good in that situation. I'll get more value out of it later. And it's like, no, it's a 5 mana card. Why would you need to deal 12 damage? It could deal 12 damage, but let's say Flamestrike is 7 mana. You should be able to actually deal like 12 damage with Flamestrike. Probably not 12 damage, maybe like more than 10, right? Like you want to deal more than 10 damage with Flamestrike. Do you always hold your Flamestrike until you can deal more than 10 damage? No. We've all played around with Flamestrike enough that we know not to do that. That is like a losing strategy. Unless it's your only out, or like you absolutely need it, or you just have like a lot of like low cost stall cards or whatever, right? But that's not what you're like aiming for. It's good if it happens. You may like do a little bit of a maneuvering to try to get there, but you're very, very happy if you Flamestrike something and you deal like 9-10 damage. So baseline here is you should know the value of the card that you're playing. And the value of the card that you're playing, especially when it's a board clear, especially when it's a double-sided board clear, it's probably lower than the value you have in your head. I see very few players who are like, oh, I'm happy with a Mass Hysteria that deals 6 damage. I'm not regretful at all. I'm just going to play it like that. No one's undervaluing the value of these cards and when you should play them. If anything, they're all being more greedy. And that's not, like, mathematically correct. Okay, so normally you're just trying to get good value out of it. So if a good value situation occurs, you're probably just going to take it. If a normal value situation occurs, you have to start thinking of whether to play it or not. So let's say my opponent has 2 3/3s on the board, right? I can Mass Hysteria, guaranteed they'll both die, and I have nothing on the board. I have 5 mana. So I could Mass Hysteria, it'll kill both of them. People don't like to Mass Hysteria in this case. It's not like a terrible play, but you're kind of at that point using your Mass Hysteria as if it was like a 100 tier list rated card. Like as if it was like even a little worse than a Yeti. And you value your Mass Hysteria more than that, so you're going to try to get a little more value of it. Now, we're going to look at the cost axis. The cost axis is how much not using the card is going to cost you. So if you use it on the turn that I'm describing, the cost is nothing, right? Because the turn is there, you haven't done anything to like set it up or anything. You have not played inefficiently at all.
Right, and I want to establish, when you say it costs nothing, that's because we're using this as a baseline. So that's what you mean when you say it costs nothing. Like, not that. Yeah.
Yeah, like, it costs nothing, and so when I'm talking about cost here, I'm not talking about mana cost. I'm talking about cost in, like, efficiency, almost. Like,
yes.
Cost in what you are doing that you would not have otherwise done, except for the fact that you're trying to set up this mass hysteria. Because every little bit of thing that you do to like try to set up the mass hysteria, it all comes at like a little bit of tempo here, a little bit of card advantage there, a little bit of face damage here. And the more advanced thing would be to know like how much face damage can I take, for example, right? So that you know the true value of all the costs. But we're not going to drill that deep. Like, as you can see, it's already getting really complicated. And this is just like one element. This is just the macro element of how to use a board clear. Like, you layer that onto like how you have to evaluate your cost. You layer that again on like, for specific cards like Mass Hysteria, on actual odds and math. And you can see, like, this is why I hate the card Mass Hysteria. It's not because it's impossible for people to do all the math in their head. It's because board clears, by its nature, have so much strategic elements in a limited like game, in a game like the Arena, that forcing you to do all this math and risk analysis by like numbers and RNG on top of it, like, it's just, if you're thinking about the card the right way, you don't have time to figure out Mass Hysteria. So I guess for people who aren't thinking about it as deeply as we are, and that as you should, Mass Hysteria is like, oh, it's fine, I just need to like figure out what my possible like outcomes are. But that's not the skill. That's not the skill that you're supposed to be testing. Right? Arithmetic is not the skill you're testing. Not the skill you should be testing. You should be testing what I'm talking about here. Anyway, so let's say you decide not to do it. Well, now, because you could have done it, and you didn't do it, and you did some other action, you've incurred some kind of cost. You're purposefully trying to save your Mass Hysteria now for something else. So, we're going to go over some costs that you may incur. The max amount of cost is obviously everything. So that is the equivalent of you basically skipping your turn. And you sometimes do that. Like 2 years ago, you would never skip a turn in the Arena. But now the Arena's gone, like, it's so swingy that like it may be correct sometimes in certain decks for certain cards to wait a full turn and wait for them to commit more. And that has a very high cost because you are literally floating all your mana, and you could have used it otherwise. In the middle, we're going to draw 4 steps. The first step is a one-step setup. A one-step setup is pretty efficient. I'm going to step away from Mass Hysteria now because it doesn't really work for Mass Hysteria. We're going to go back to like something like Consecration. Let's say your opponent has a 4-4 on the board and you have a 2-4 on the board. A one-step setup is something like going face with the 4-2 instead of like putting up a taunt to protect your going face with the 2-4 instead of putting up a taunt to protect your 2-4. So just like letting him have it, knowing that he's going to end up with a 4-2 after the trade, so that your Consecration can wipe things up and clean things up the next turn, right? So you're letting him have the efficient trade that he's trying to set up, which is not very efficient for you because you have a taunt in your hand. You could prevent that from happening, but you're doing it because you're going to get the value back the next turn in anticipation if you can use your Consecration the next turn. Usually it involves like doing a trade in a different way than you would have otherwise, or just going face and getting some face damage. That's what I call that a one-step setup, or like a very minor setup. The bigger version of that is a full push setup, which is I'm going to play a whole bunch of 2-2s now on top of my 4-2, so I don't care which way you're hitting, you're going to end up with something with 2 damage. So this involves a lot of commitment on your side, in the sense of like you're still committing to the board and things, but it's just a different way of doing a one-step setup. Your basic idea is you're still playing the game, right? You're still using your mana, you're still putting out tempo, you're just not putting it out in the most efficient way. You're just not attacking face or making trades in the most efficient way in anticipation of the fact that you have a backup card in your hand. This usually, like, it can work for double-sided too, but it's usually for single-sided. And the other way of looking at cost, the other thing to cost, is when you actually like skip out on tempo. So whenever you draw cards, heal, or hero power instead of tempo, every time you hero power, I just think of it as drawing a card. Like if I hero power and I'm dealing 1 damage, I've like drew a shiv and used it, right? Like that's the mage hero power. Draw a shiv and use it somewhere, because you don't use a card and you get to do something, and that's the card. So you're getting card advantage out of it. So whenever you do anything like that, instead of tempoing out like you normally should have done, you've encouraged some kind of inefficiency. And if you're doing that, on top of floating some amount of your mana, you're doing it even more inefficiently. So that's the rising cost. If you're looking at us playing the game generally, you will see us do a lot of one-step setups and full push setups. Because there is inefficiency that happens there, but it's not like it's not messing too much with your game plan. Like you're still tempoing. You're still like arguably playing the mid-range game. Just that if now your opponent steps into your board clear, you're going to get a good reward out of it, right? Like you're doing the setup. It's low cost. It's low cost, high reward, potentially. And we like that. So a lot of that kind of stuff is happening. You can also turn it into a read, even though it's kind of a higher level thing. But like if you're facing a player that you think has so far been making good moves, and then they do something like a full push setup, you could like really, really suspect they have that follow-up board clear, or at least removal. What you see us doing less often, and I know I'm uncomfortable doing this, even though I sometimes do it and recognize it as the correct play, is to like, it's turn 5. I'm going to use the mage, play an arcane intellect, and hero power something. Why? Because I have a blizzard. And I don't want all of my opponent's 2/2s on the board to trade into anything I put out. Now, what happens, Merps, if you face that? Your opponent is a mage. You have 3 2/2s on the board. Your opponent's a mage on turn 5. They arcane intellect to ping your face.
I mean, my thought when something like that happens is, okay, you anti-tempoed, you're going to blizzard the next turn, or like you sold it, so, or not sold it, but like you telegraphed exactly what you're going to do, right? Mm-hmm. And first question is just, man, how do I take advantage of this? So what you want to look at is like, all right, now it's either it's my turn 6 or perhaps like my turn 5, depending on who went first. Can I put down something that just won't die to blizzard? Yep. Right? Can I put something down like a Mashog announcer, right? Like that's beefy, that's good, it's offensively statted. And then what is my follow-up after that, right? Because my Mashog is probably going to get frozen by the blizzard. It's like, can I heal him up the next turn, or can I just like follow that up with another fatty, and then they have to have the meteor on top of the blizzard? So that's what you want to think about. What you don't want to do is, after you have tempoed out and your opponent has drawn cards, you don't want to fall back into the mindset. It's like, oh, okay, he's drawing cards. That means I should draw cards as well. Right. Because if he's taking away your tempo, typically in the scenario that ADWCTA laid out, you are going to be sort of like behind if you just let him sweep the board and you don't put on pressure. Or pressure was the one thing you had, and you can keep on doing it. And then if you take your foot off the gas, you're giving your opponents a higher chance to win there.
Yeah. So you hear all of that? That's like 4 separate ways that Merps thought of on the spot to screw you if you try to set up a blizzard. And that's going to happen. And the cards that he's using to screw you, they're not uncommon cards at all. They're cards your opponent are very likely to have. Like I would say like 80% plus chance to have. So that's why it takes either a hard read that your opponent can't do anything at all, or it takes like a card that can actually wipe away all your mistakes, like a Psychic Stream or Twisting Nether, to be able to do things that are super anti-tempo, because the cost is otherwise very high. You may think about the cost as like, oh, there's cost, but I'm going to make up for it, right? My Blizzard's going to deal more damage, because even if a Boulder Fist Ogre comes out, it'll be frozen and 2 damage would have been dealt to it, right? Well, it's like, yeah, but you still don't have the board. Like, what's your plan after that? Like, sure, you got more value out of your Blizzard, but you're losing the game more, even though you got more value out of your Blizzard. So
yeah, you see this happen quite often. People do this play, and then I would say 95% of the time, I'm just like, that is wrong.
yeah.
That is wrong. And then I always caveat it. I'm like, that is wrong unless he has Blizzard into Flamestrike,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they do. But your play should always be to try to punish that. So, yeah.
And bringing that back to mass hysteria, your opponent can do the same thing with mass hysteria. If you have 2/3/3s and you skip out on it, well, what if your opponent, like next, plays like 2 more other minions? One's a 2/2, one's a 3/3. What happens now? Well, what happens now is that you can't full clear your opponent anymore. Like, that scenario just broke down for you. Like, 0% chance to full clear your opponent. Does your opponent do it on purpose? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they're just playing creatures, right? Like, it doesn't matter. Once you miss an opportunity to use your board clear, it may not come back again. And if you think you're being clever about setting something up, you need a read or desperation before you do that. Or the cards that Merps is talking about to back it up. So that's the cost access versus the value access, right? The key to remember about how these accesses connect is, one, the more cost you're spending, the more value you better be getting, which ties into 2, which is, why do you want that much value? Do you need that much value to win? If you do, then maybe you got to take the risk. Maybe you got to take the risk that your opponent misplays, or that your opponent just doesn't have, he's in that 20% scenario where he can't do anything to you. He only has minions that have 2 health. Or he has to slow down as well, right? Like, that's fine. You win this interaction if that happens. And while the risk is not really worth it, if you're not going to win the game in any other way, or if you have a very little chance of winning the game if he doesn't fully commit onto a board of 2 health minions, then you got to do it. So that's the axis you're traveling along. And at any point a decision is going to fail that axis, you'd never make it. So a lot of people think they're playing a control deck, and they'll just keep baiting stuff. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here, and I'm like, he has 4 cards. You have 8. What are you baiting for? Why do you need the value? What is the value getting you? The value you need is not the value of having more cards in your hand at this point. It's the value of having, like, health or, like, tempo. And you can throw away some of these cards and get bad value. You can Hellfire to deal 2 damage to something, and it will still be fine. So, recognize what's on this, what has a good cost to value ratio, and 2, recognize what value you actually need. Because these cards they're traps. All board clears are traps for you, for any player. Which is why you see all board clears being rated pretty much really insanely high on our tier list, because they end up with good win rates by bad players who have fallen into the traps, and they still get the good value out of it, because that's how these cards are designed. They're comeback cards, right? So as a good player, if you can recognize the traps, avoid them, and play these in a macro efficient way, you will actually get the good value out of these cards. Like, overall good value, without costing yourself, like, important efficiencies in the game, in the other areas of your game plan.
Yeah, I think it's Shady that keeps on reminding his chat, you don't get bonus points for winning more.
No.
You don't get bonus points for having more cards at the end. You don't get bonus points for absolutely dominating them and having, more health. You just get the win. It's like at the end of the game, one person wins, one person loses. That's the only thing that gets recorded. So that's all you need to do. Like, keep your eye on the prize, grab the win, do whatever's necessary. If it's naturalizing a zombie chow, you got to do that, right? It all goes back to knowing how, like, what your position is and the pathway that you need to take to win. And some people, whether they like cute plays or whether they just, it's like Gollum and the Ring, their mind just gets poisoned, and they have to take that value. They have to take infinite value with their cards.
Yeah.
And just like Golem in the Ring, it causes their demise.
Yeah, like these like think about these things. What's a consecration? It's 4 mana. How much damage do you want to deal with 4 mana on the board? I don't know, 5. Like, why are you saving your consecration to kill a million things? The one that people get so greedy about, Mossy Horror. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, come on. This is like this guy, he's good, and he's good if you just kill one solid target. Like, if you have a costless way to use it as a Kodo, Kodo's a good card. This is basically a 1 mana higher Kodo. So if you get a target that's like slightly better than a single Kodo target, you're good. You don't have to like save it for the worm or like these other things. Like, you could, that's a little bonus to consider like potentially saving it. But I don't know, evaluate what you need right now. And if you don't need like the additional cards or card advantage in your hand, and you'd rather have some tempo, use it. Okay. That's deep fried meta, where we deep fry the meta. This is not so much a particular thing about this particular meta, but it's an overarching thing that will affect every meta. And like, honestly, it's one of two. It's easy to play control decks. Your decisions are generally made for you because you don't have options. There are 2, maybe 3 main things you're actually thinking about when you're playing a control deck. This is one of them. So devote a lot of thought to this if you have a control deck, because it's going to make the difference. And most of the time, the difference it's going to make is you using it earlier, or you using it to get less value, rather than saving it and setting up more and more as you lose more and more, like, position on the board. Okay. Let's flip this around now. Let's talk a little about aggro. Card good bad. Springpaw.
Yeah. All right. Springpaw. Do you want to introduce it, or should I just talk about how much I love it?
It's a 1 mana 1/1 beast. It charges. It rushes.
Oh god, I wish it charged.
It rushes, and it adds another 1/1 rushing beast into your hand. So it's potentially 2 mana for 2 1/1s that rush different things. And you can play it on different turns, and it triggers a bunch of combos and stuff. 111 on our tier list.
Consistently, we have seen pings in aggressive classes that cannot ping are really good, right? So the 2 classes really are Hunters and Paladins. This is why Springpaw is good, just like Light's Justice or Candle Shot. And Hunters with Springpaw are especially good because of the synergies that they have. Scavenging Hyena is a pretty common pick for Hunters nowadays because of the number of beasts that you can get, because of the number of small beasts that you can get. Which Springpaw synergizes very well with. It also synergizes really well with Crackling Razor Maul, which in my opinion is just an auto pick. There are perhaps because Crackling Razor Maul is a first bucket card.
Yeah, super high bucket card.
And for me, the only one I would consider taking over is Eaglehorn Bow. But right now, with the way that the buckets are, so that you could get a Headhunter's Hatchet in the 3rd bucket, sometimes I pass up the bow if I'm getting if I already have double hatchet, you know? Crackling Razor Maul is pretty much an auto pick, which makes Springpaw on 1 into Razor Maul a really, really good play. So the Springpaw I think it's made its way into most of my aggro hunter decks. And at no point was I like, wow, this was a bad pick. I should pick something else. I'm always happy with it.
Yeah, like when you bring up Crackling Razor Maul versus Eaglehorn Bow, like you'd say like 2 metas ago or like 1 meta ago. I think we'd all say like Eaglehorn Bow. Obviously, it's bow, it's OP, it's reach, it's everything you could want. But now the buckets are in such a weird spot, and as a hunter, especially if you want to be an aggressive hunter and you don't want secrets, it's really hard to actually get enough 2s. And so I find myself taking Razor Maul over Eaglehorn Bow the vast majority of times. And
yeah.
I get a lot of pushback on this from chat, but like even early on, I just don't trust that I'm going to get enough twos. And so I want that Crackling Razor Maul as a Raptor, even if the rest of the deck, doesn't end up like fitting that. Especially if I'm going aggro, but even if I'm going a little control, because the secrets are also like kind of over bucketed because they used to support the Spellstone that was super OP, and now the Spellstone's kind of just like a regular card. So yeah, it makes a card that Crackling Razor Maul can support even better, and that is Springpaws' position. It's not the best card to be supported by Crackling Razor Maul in the early game, but later on, it's a great comboer because it rushes, and you can rush the poison. I think one of the most, at least for me, one of the best parts about Springpaw is how non-committal it is. Because your two best hunter archetypes are combo or aggro, and Springpaw is super good in both. So, like, it's also not like too high of a bucket. Which bucket is this guy in? But it allows you to kind of hedge your draft, even when you're not like when you haven't committed to one archetype or the other. I know Merps doesn't care about that; he's just gonna go aggro all the way. But when you're
doesn't matter for me.
When you're looking at something like this is the top of the second bucket, right? You take a Venom Strike trap, you're not aggro anymore, right? You take an Unleash the Hounds, that's okay, that's a good. I still like Unleash the Hounds over Springpaw. But you take a Baited Arrow, you're not really aggro anymore. You take a Freezing Trap, you're questionably aggro anymore. So if you want to preserve that flexibility, Springpaw is in this like unique position. The problem with Springpaw, of course, is that it is in the top of the second bucket. At 111, even if it's in a very good situation, it's still like a bit over bucketed. And so you are going to sacrifice other really good cards for it.
Yeah, it's but for me, and the reason why Springpaw finds its way into so many of my decks is because if you look at the second bucket, there are so many that are good general cards, but I wouldn't pick, right? Stonehoe Defender, I pick like basically every card over that. Baited Arrow is good, but once again, because of my, I don't want to pick that many fives. I might be at a point where I just need the Springpaw over the Baited Arrow, right? Which is actually a lot of times.
And then you got Freezing Trap, Venom Strike Trap. That's all a no-go for you.
Venom Strike Trap is definitely like below Springpaw. Freezing Trap, perhaps, right?
Because Freezing Trap is under bucketed, so like heavily under bucketed. It should be in that like kick-ass bucket for Hunter that has all the other stuff.
Right. And then we have stuff like Hunting Mastiff, which is a no for me. And even stuff like Wing Blast and Explosive Shot, I would totally take those, but I need to make sure I don't have too many of those. So that's how Springpaw kind of always finds its way in the deck because of all the stuff that it's up against.
Yeah. And the neutrals up here don't work for you either, right? Like even going above it, Primordial Drake, too slow, Bone Mare, too slow, Cobalt Scalebane, too slow, Arcane Dynamo, definitely too slow, Weaponized Pinata, too slow, Fireplume Phoenix, okay, maybe.
Yeah, I would take Fireplume. But once again, we've identified so many that it's up against that I would consider below it, significantly below for Aggro Hunter, right? If it's Springpaw versus Primordial Drake, oh my gosh, Springpaw every
easy
single time.
Springpaw if you're aggro.
Yeah. So this is why if you play aggro, you are probably going to find a Springpaw in your deck somehow.
Yep. All right. That's it for Card Good Bad. Next week's Card Good Bad, we're going to talk about Scarabeg. That card has found its way into way more of my decks than I wanted to. So I feel like I randomly have a whole ton of experience with this card, and so we'll talk about Scarabeg next. I don't know. Have we done a Card Good Bad with Scarabeg? I don't think we have, right?
I don't think we have. Not Scarabeg.
Okay, so let's do Scarabeg. It's interesting because for 2 mana, it even if you just have, we'll talk about it next week. So let's finish this off with a question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT, Merps.
Question from the GOAT comes from our Grinning Goat subreddit. It was asked by Dreadnought, and the question was, hey guys, just wondering if you had any thoughts on how many runs you need to play per week or per month to maintain or raise your skill. And then he goes on to ask, well, what benefits are there to taking breaks, or like how much should you grind? Essentially, is there a sweet spot on how many runs you should be playing to make sure that you're all caught up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I wrote an answer on the subreddit, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. What I like gave a very I remember I was at work and I was like, I'm gonna math this out, and then I like mathed it out in my head, and then I gave the answer. I don't think I like showed my work.
So essentially what you said was for every week that you don't play, it takes approximately 2 runs to catch up to the meta. And you said cap it at 12. So anything longer than a month and a half, it'll take a good player 12 runs to catch up to the meta.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Because when we're talking about the meta, we're not talking about like being able to use every single class efficiently. It's more like knowing what you're going to see, right? Like that's what the meta is. It's what other people are playing. And 2 runs is generally enough for each week that you don't play to to reorient yourself, right, into what's happening. I do this a lot, and like I have experience in this where quite frequently I go like a whole week without playing, right? Like if I miss a stream or something, or like even just what happened there, I got sick, and I didn't play Hearthstone for I think like 2 weeks. It was a while because I had gotten sick after the Tuesday stream, and then I didn't play for a week and a half. So I didn't play Hearthstone for a week and a half, and the meta obviously hasn't changed in this time. So I came back, and in the very first run, I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing, but like I wasn't 100% comfortable and confident. By the second run, I was pretty much there already, and in the third run, I got 12, and I felt very happy about it. But yeah, so if you're off for more time, you take more to get yourself back. It's the arena, right? Like it's all about fundamentals. It's just not that hard to get back into it. I know a lot of our listeners and our viewers, because it's Hearthstone, right? Like everyone's the not joke, but like the reality is everyone's quit Hearthstone. Even if you still play Hearthstone, you've quit Hearthstone at some point. This is just it's been around for too long at this point. It's too popular that everyone's tried it and everyone's quit it, and some people are back, and people who are not back yet may be back at some other time, or maybe they'll never be back. Maybe they don't even play anymore, but it's still interesting to watch, right, and follow and see the new cards and whatever. But it's not a hard game to come back to, I think, no matter how long you've taken off. And if you enjoy fundamentals for this kind of stuff, like this kind of mini puzzle solving, like strategic card game thing, and you like it in a limited format, it's gonna be here for you. Like, and you're gonna be like riding a bike. You're gonna be back on it. You're gonna be doing well again, or as well as you used to be doing, and in no time. So if anyone's thinking of coming back into the game, go for it. I think it's a good time to come back. This is a very good meta overall in terms of skill. Me and Merps really enjoy the meta by how much, like, we were both actually play 30 runs in a month during this meta. That literally has not happened in more than a year for either of us. So we're enjoying the meta. It's all going to change in a month when the new expansion comes down, the rotation happens. So it is a good time to reorient yourself to the overall Hearthstone game. And by the same token, if you're looking to potentially quit, now is also a great time to quit. Like, everything's going to change in a month. Take a month off. You'll be fine. It's
so
not
you don't mean
be...
actually quit.
Right. I don't mean like quit forever. I would never encourage someone to quit forever unless they have like an addiction problem or something. But like if you're just like not feeling it for a while, but like you have this like compulsion to keep playing Hearthstone, but you think you may be able to put your time to better use elsewhere, it's a good time to drop Hearthstone for a while. And pick it up again when the new expansion and rotation happens. You're not going to miss much. Like, honestly, nothing much is going to happen for the next 6 weeks in the game. So, it cuts both ways. And that's what's great about Hearthstone, especially limited Hearthstone. You can pick it up whenever, you can drop it whenever. You do have to ramp yourself back up a little, but it's so much easier than other stuff. Like, I can't imagine. Like, you were talking to me before about, like, getting back into Overwatch for a little bit, right? And I was just like, I can't even imagine the like mental like prep work and experience I need to get back into Overwatch. And I used to play a good deal of Overwatch. I was like, master rank and I like knew all the tanks, and I knew all the stages, I knew all the setups or whatever. And now they're like, oh yeah, people are running goats. I'm like, what are goats?
Time for us. It's our meta. Well, on that, I think a lot of people would advise that you don't get back into Overwatch, at least for now. But we'll see. They're gonna mix things up.
Oh.
So now would be perhaps a good time to take a break from Overwatch and from Hearthstone, and I don't know, do some life things. Increase one of your life skills.
I recommend, like, seriously, question from the go wise, getting to our personal lives and other stuff a bit. I've been so into freaking watching Smash tournaments this year. Like, I have never gotten so into watching an esport before. Just the commentating is so freaking good, and the matches are so tense. It triggers something primal in me, in the reaction to a match being like close or being won or whatever, especially when I know what's going on. Like, I know the moves they're using. I know when someone whiffs something. I know, like, you know, if it's impressive or not to have like a third up air follow up to a combo or whatever. And the same names appear in a whole bunch of tournaments. Like, I didn't know any of them before I started watching, but it's definitely well done. If you guys want to like chill back and watch some esports, I think the Smash scene is very well set up. And then there's also random Japanese players that come in, which is great because they all play different characters than the people in America do, and they're like of equal skill. It's not like they're destroying us or we're destroying them, and they have like all these storylines. It's great.
Esports is in a good spot right now, where you still have this a little bit of a Wild West mentality, and kind of anything can happen kind of thing. But it's also a lot more polished, right?
Yeah.
Just look at the
polish
Overwatch.
is so much better than it was like 2-3 years ago.
No, that's exactly how it is. I mean, look at Twitch Rivals, right? Look at the Overwatch League, and it is really fun. I share in your enthusiasm for all of this stuff as well. Like, some games that I don't even understand. Like, so GSL for StarCraft, I watched that, and I just appreciate how hard StarCraft is generally, but I don't understand it. For something like Overwatch, though, in which I actually understand it, and then there are super hype plays, right, in which someone just like pops off. You see Jonak just like with Zenyatta hit like 7 balls to the head in a row. I'm just like, my gosh, how are you that good? So it's really cool. You can take a break, do like watch some other people dominate games, and then come back when the expansion hits for Hearthstone and the game is brand new. Like, it'll actually feel like a new game after the rotation.
I mean, that's why we're dedicating 3, like, seriously, all the Lightforges after this, 3 episodes to basically getting rid of cards and the rotation. Then all the episodes after that to all the new cards that are coming in. And then when the card dump happens, we're going to have our 6-hour session again. And it's going to be a brand new arena. And the cards that are leaving are not cards that are going to be missed. They're not as terrible. The last rotation was really, I think, a super good rotation, because actually, like, broken cards that you're like, what is your balance team doing, existed. Less so here, but a lot of the big offenders may be in the neutral category and maybe more arena impacting than they are constructed impacting. Whereas the cards that remain are generally more in control, so it's gonna be good. And yeah, if you don't want to leave, please feel free to watch us still, because we are still on Twitch, and we will still be playing the arena. We're not dropping the arena. We'll be playing it through. Although, and I think this may be, I don't know if it's just because I played more runs in this meta than anyone else, or not than anyone else, than what I usually do in a meta, or it's because that the meta has really just not shifted all that much. That like the launch of Rastakhan to now is fairly similar relative to how much meta usually shift. But I think this is the first time where this early on in a meta, I'm like ready for an event or something to shake things up, like majorly.
No, it's happened before as well. Yeah, it's happened before. I think people like just get bored with certain kind of.
I know other people get bored. I mean, I don't usually until like me personally. Usually it's like it takes me like 2-3 weeks before the next expansion launches when I'm like, okay, I'm ready for it. But we're like more than 6 weeks out, and I'm already like, okay, I know the meta like pretty damn well. It doesn't seem like it's gonna change. It's a good meta. I have no complaints about the meta or any cards or like whatever. But it's staling a little.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right. Any last words before we wrap up this Lightforge?
No, that's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that lecture from ADWCTA. I know he always enjoys it.
That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna retire one day and give lectures on strategy games, on fundamentals. Not even like the high level strategies. Like, you notice everything we're teaching you on the Lightforge. If you go back for like the 4 years we've been doing this, they're all pretty fundamentals on like the strategy thing. It's sometimes very specific, but they're fundamentals. Like, these are not the things that are actually going to get you like 8 wins per run, but they'll get you to like 6.57. Okay. That's it from us. Until next week, then, when we kick off the big transition into the rotation series of the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merp. See you guys.